Anyone that's
We're at a point in time coming off of a wild Saturday of college football. People are consistently peeking over at this board. He actually would not be my number one overall pick, nor would I bet him to be the number one overall pick. I think you got that next wave of NFL players, which is so enticing, which when you see Jaden Daniels come into the NFL and you go, I can get something like that with a guy with just as good an arm.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome into college football today. It is time for the post-game show. And what a long Saturday slate we have had, but it has been far from exciting. A number of overtime games in college footballs, a number of upset alerts, some comebacks, some returns, just so much to unpack and get into, which makes college football all the more exciting to unpack this Saturday night. But I don't get to do it alone, y'all. Y'all know the deal. It's Kasey Hudson with Dubs Anderson getting to run through this. I missed Dubs last week. I didn't get a chance to talk college football with him and go through all the madness a week ago. So we got some things to catch up on for one, but a lot of exciting football to get in for two. But most importantly, Dubs, how are you? How much did you miss me?
Kasey, what is going on? I miss you as much as the Longhorns miss Quinn Ewers. Not really. And I believe we've got a special guest joining us tonight. So a really special recap show. Look, halfway through the regular season college football, we're not closer to knowing who are the good teams, who are the bad teams. I mean, how quickly it all changes in a couple of weeks for a team like Alabama. For Lincoln Riley, USC, the pressure continues to mount after what we saw this afternoon. A couple of bad beats, a couple of OT thrillers, and the Heisman Trophy is just sitting there on a pedestal, Kasey, and nobody wants to take it. It's a wide open market, and I look forward to jumping in and dissecting that one as well.
Yeah, the Heisman Trophy's kind of turned into a little bit of a hot potato competition. It's just one guy has it, tosses it to the next. That's a great place to start probably with Alabama, with Milroy, because during the entire game, especially when they looked like they were going to fall short to South Carolina, it was, is this guy actually going to be able to continue to contest for the Heisman? But most importantly, what Carolina's defense did so perfectly was continue to force Milroy to the perimeter, take away his running lanes, take away his opportunity to make those big plays and those big throws. So if other defenses take a page out of the Gamecocks book, we're looking at some interesting matchups for Alabama down the stretch. But as I mentioned, that is where we'll get things going. Alabama almost fell short to South Carolina, but pulled through a 27-25 victory. And a lot of that comes to key turnovers, key capitalizations, but most importantly, not finishing playing football until that final whistle blows, the turning point for them being in full command in that fourth quarter. What did we like about this game? And did this almost take them out of the playoff picture? Because that was the other conversation outside of the Heisman, that Alabama doesn't have much margin for error when it comes to the playoff talk.
No, they really don't. And if you're looking for style points, they're certainly not going to get it with a 27-25 victory over South Carolina at home. They went off at 19.5-point favorites, so it wasn't good enough on that side of things for the Gamecocks. They had a chance late in this one, I guess, to get the win, or at least send it to OT with a 2-point conversion. Didn't work out in their favor. So for Bama, they escaped with one. It's certainly a victory they needed to keep their season moving in the right direction. Maybe this is the spark that they needed, but I tell you what, really has been a bit of a flat spot the last couple of weeks there. So for Kalen DeBoer, not going to like what we saw out of this one, but at least they did come out with that victory, survive, advance, moving on to the next one. They now sit 5-1, 2-1 in conference play. Was strong without being fantastic. A couple of interceptions really let South Carolina stay in this game for much, much longer than what they really should have been there. So 209 passing yards, really didn't get a lot going with that run game. And for Bama, they've really got to set the table up to get that passing game going deep field. You know, get the verticals going. They just couldn't get the rushing attack going, and that's why it ended up being such a close one. But this is certainly going to be a game in which they could look back on once it's all said and done. Expanded playoffs at the end of the year, saying, lucky we got that one. That could have been their playoff hopes down the drain.
Absolutely. And kind of touching on the fact that you mentioned the run game, we know that Miller likes to use his legs, and that's typically his go-to when he can't see downfield to make those big plays. But he came out with only 36 rushing yards. I know you're thinking only 30. We're talking about a quarterback here, but this is a guy who's in that dual threat category. So yes, only, because typically you're looking at 50-plus rushing yards from Milroe. And then when it comes to the arm, at least he was able to air out the ball, 209 passing yards, as you just mentioned, Dubs. But 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, and those 2 interceptions were also almost extraordinarily compromising for this team to make way. Leading the rush room, though, was Miller, and he only picked up 42 rushing yards as well. So we'll see how Alabama game plans and redirects, but it was almost a big day for the underdogs. Now, for another team or exciting matchup, you kind of already touched on them. It was Texas versus Oklahoma, or the Red River rivalry. I don't know. Somebody got to stick a flag in the ground at the end of this game, and somebody got to walk away with a trophy. That's somebody being Texas, who continues to roll and show that you do not mess with Texas. 34-3. When this game opened up, it seemed like the Sooners were going to apply a lot of pressure. They had their foot on Texas's neck, and it seemed like it was their game for the taking. But we're talking about like the first 8 minutes of the quarter. They weren't able to commit and convert that first field goal. Then they end up getting the ball back again, finally finding the field goal, leading by 3 points. But one thing I've noticed with Texas, it's like they play with their food in the first quarter. Second quarter, they kind of start to show their team, their opponent, what they're actually capable of. That second half is complete takeoff for this Texas team. They did it versus Colorado State week 1. It was kind of the script I thought they were going to match today, and that's basically what happened, although they came in live and hot in the second quarter, putting up 21 points, and it was the return of Quinn Ewers, who that first quarter didn't very much look himself, but they brilliantly had more of a balanced attack. They used their run game a lot more. Wisner closing out the day with 118 yards on the ground. What do you expect out of this guy? Can he jump back in the Heisman conversation? Because 199 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception upon return isn't particularly terrible.
No, sluggish start, and I guess that was symbolic from what we saw there in the first quarter. I was sitting back saying, where's Arch Manning? Why did we not stick with Arch at starting quarterback? The Longhorns came into this one with a lot of expectation. Number 1 team in the nation. Go scoreless there through the first. They put up 21-0 in that second quarter. So they firmly, I guess, got a grasp of it. And then they absolutely looked like the best team in the country as we got through that second half. But for Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, I mean, they were banged up. 5 wide receivers were set to miss this one. So a lot of injuries. It was tough for them once it was all said and done. But for Texas, they were tested early. They prevailed. The class ultimately came to the top there late. And for Quinn Ewers, this is expected. It's going to take a couple of games to get things going in the right direction, that chemistry, that cohesion. But Steve Sarkisian has told us this is the guy. This is the guy to give him the best chance of winning that national championship. And we absolutely saw why. So for Quinn Ewers, once you get a bit of fitness, a bit of confidence going back in the right direction, what a spoil of riches it really is there for the Longhorns over in Austin. To have Quinn Ewers and then have Arch Manning, 1-2 punch if you really need it once it's all said and done. But I thought it was a really strong return and a classy victory there, 34-33 in a rivalry spot where there's always a bit of extra juice on the line.
Yeah, and while we're sitting here talking about Texas's offense and the return of Quinn Ewers, sitting at 22-1 odds for the Heisman Trophy, I think we got to give some love to this Texas defense. I mean, yes, Oklahoma has been banged up, and it was going to be expected to see how they were going to prevail down the field and get their offense firing off. But most importantly, there were some big plays by Texas at the right time, especially in the second half there. Taft being one of the top guys in the backfield for Texas that was able to come in strong with big plays. I mean, he had some amazing reads. So when people talk about this Texas team and the highlight being the offense, we got to give some love to the defense that just continues to prevail and stand out. I think they're holding their competition to 7 or less points per game, and that's not only just pertaining to strength of schedule and some of these other unranked teams. This was a big battle today, and they were able to show up and continue to conduct themselves accordingly. But would you say that Quinn Ewers' ranking from 22-1 odds for Heisman can move? I know we got less than a minute, but I just want to know where we're sitting with Heisman talk and Ewers.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a running back in Ashton Jeanty who's out there as we speak as the top choice, right around plus 250. That tells me everything. This market is wide open, cannot decide who is going to be that guy once it's all said and done. We know traditionally it's a quarterback-heavy market. They've won 12 of the last 14. For Quinn Ewers, if he can continue to lead this Longhorns offense and push them towards a national championship, of course, he is going to be right in the mix. We saw it before the injury. We saw enough there today at 22-1. This is the must-buy low spot for Quinn Ewers in that Heisman market. You're not going to get a number like that moving forward.
Beautiful. C-fans, something to keep in mind and stick a pin in as we continue to roll through this college football season. But speaking of rolling, me and Dub still have plenty of football to unpack, so stick with us because we got a quick break here on SportsGrid TV and a guest joining us at that half-hour spot.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in the set than I do for this year. I am ready. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long. What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take the Bruins.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
I do a sliding DiVincenzo to the one. Obviously, Terrence Shannon Jr., that is actually dynamic offensively and defensively. So we'll see how it works. I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. Do both teams win? Yes. I don't think at the end of the day, Minnesota could have afforded to keep Cat, Rudy, and Ant with that amount of money.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I do think they come back, and I think they win this game, but they've got to do it decisively. I think they've got to get that confidence back because they went out there, and like I said earlier, Kentucky almost beat Georgia. Kentucky almost did beat Ole Miss, and I think what you're going to see in this conference, if you don't play well and you're a top 10 team in the SEC, you're going to get knocked out by one of those top 25 teams in the SEC if you're not ready to play.
Powered by SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football today. It's Kasey Hudson and Dubs Anderson and a guest coming with us at 11:30 Eastern time. So make sure you stick around with us here on SportsGrid TV as we unpack the Saturday slate of a lot of exciting football. We were just talking about Texas staying hot, continuing to roll, pulling off a 34-3 victory over Oklahoma today. But speaking of exciting games, I don't know why. I don't know what my issue is with Penn State. I swear there's nothing personal. I can't dig back into the memory bank and figure out.
It's Dave Sarapan's team. That's why you don't like him. That's the same reason I have. It's Sharapan's team, Kasey. There you go. Fill in the blanks.
Thank you. I really try to avoid that being the issue. I love Sharapan, but yeah, I guess his love for Penn State just really makes me root against them. So, of course, in the first half of them going against USC, I was like, wow, I've got a text drafted for Sharapan, rubbing it in his face. I said it from the beginning. Penn State's got this bruising defense that can really give it to the other team, but their offense just can't match tempo. They're not consistent. They don't show up in the first half. And then I had to remind myself, wait a minute. This is the team that shows up all of a sudden in the second half and then tends to make these rally comebacks, and that's why they're so high on themselves. And, well, the script fit. 33-30 over USC, a USC team that was in complete control in the first half. I mean, 13 points in the second quarter, while Penn State only had 6 points. Then, on top of it, they come back out and just completely lose rhythm. Penn State puts up 14 points in the third quarter, tops it off, and ties things up in the fourth quarter, takes things into overtime, and secures the W. I don't even know where to start with this one, Dub, so I'm just going to toss it to you for opinion or whatever stood out for you in this game or what players, anything, because I had to erase my entire message to Dave Sharapan and eat crow.
Still send it. Sharapan, shout out. I love you, my guy. I'd say what I do not love and what I do not like out here on the West Coast, USC, this is disappointing. 3-3 for the season, 1-3 in conference play. Lincoln Riley's getting paid the big bucks, but this is a 30-minute football team. They cannot seem to get out of the dogfight. They had this one well and truly in their grasp, but they could not close it out. There are a couple of special performances that we certainly need to highlight. Drew Aller was fantastic for the Nets. 391 passing yards, 2 tutties, 3 interceptions there, but he looks fantastic. 6'4", 6'5". He's got that physical presence. He's got an arm to absolutely match. And what a record-setting day there for the big tight end. My guy, Tyler Warren, 17 receptions, 224 receiving yards in a touchdown. So a really special afternoon there for Tyler Warren. They've got the quarterback play, but for me, it was a more disappointing performance from USC because they continue to show so much promise early in these games. And for Penn State, this is a classy side. They keep number 4 in the nation. So for USC, had to get up. But Lincoln Riley, my guy, not good enough again. He tells us in the presser, but yeah, look how close we've been in all these games. We've had the toughest schedule in the nation. I can agree in part with some of that statement, but for a guy who's been brought in to get the results, USC are failing to get it done, and that is the end of their season. Hate to be that guy, but they in no way in going into the college playoffs after today.
Yeah, you can only kind of sing that same tune for so long. We've been in tough games. We've stayed in tough matchups, but you continue to give away the game. Like, you have a team that had 3 turnovers by their quarterback and still closes out the day with 391 passing yards. And then you mentioned the monster performance by Warren, 224 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. That's 17 receptions. So to allow a team to make that much progress in production, being counted out a quarter where they really didn't show up whatsoever, that speaks volumes to how many other teams are going to game plan just as strongly against you, and they're going to show up, surprise, surprise, in the first half versus in the second half, pushing this whole game into overtime. So I'm right there with you, Dubs. I think that it's most disappointing that USA wasn't able to hold off their opponent and continue to play for 4 quarters of football. You can't let a team like Penn State back in, and they deserve absolute credit for their ability to rally and take over in that third quarter. 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, field goal and a touchdown in the fourth quarter to tie things up. Most importantly, though, 518 yards of total play, 400 of that through the air. So to adjust and make a comeback is tremendous. Now, you mentioned their quarterback, Drew Aller, and where he's sitting in the Heisman conversation, 29 to 9 odds to kind of prevail here. If we keep seeing these comeback performances from Penn State, this is something that could look alive for Drew, right?
Absolutely. We highlighted off the tip-off, the Heisman market is wide, and we're looking for value. We're looking for players and teams that can absolutely make a run. Obviously, for Penn State, they can remain undefeated. That's really going to buoy Aller's chances moving through. They've got Wisconsin next week. They're going to be a tough out. Then they face number 2, Ohio State. So if you're looking to jump in, I would say now's the spot. If they can go through and pick up a couple of wins, that number will continue to firm up over the Badgers there next week in Ohio State. That would be true for Penn State. But I tell you what, overachieving, but rightfully so. Defense has been pretty strong. I know they gave up a few points, but never an easy task coming out to the West Coast. You've got to travel. It's a tough spot going against USC. And I mean, their defense, the secondary's been a lot better, but They caught him napping again. Went to OT, got those style points, so that's going to go a long way in helping the quarterback's chances stay relevant in the Heisman conversation.
Caught a napping. That's a great way to put that. And while USC complains about their tough schedule, coming down the pipeline here, you've got USC getting ready to take on Maryland, so they're going to hit the road here shortly. So road performances tend to be a bit tough after a sour loss as such. Then you got Rutgers that's going to be visiting USC, so they're going to be taking this coast to coast here, which can add some fatigue to their play. So something else to keep in mind as you navigate their lines and odds moving through the college football season here. After Rutgers, then you have USC going to Washington. This is going to be a neck-and-neck battle for this team, and they cannot slack off whatsoever because Washington will make them pay for it. Nebraska can be a punishing team in their own way. UCLA can be surprising in their own way. And then Notre Dame, I mean, we're going to talk about Notre Dame after the break, and then we're going to have our guest. I'm not going to drop his name yet because, of course, I want you guys to stay tuned with us here on SportsGrid. But Notre Dame is going to be a team worth talking about. I know that some people might talk about their strength of schedule, especially because of some of the upsets that they've encountered throughout this collegiate season. But most importantly, it's their quarterback that really fits the description of being a dual threat guy. And he kind of hit one of his overs when it comes to passing yards. So plenty to unpack when it comes to Notre Dame. We're going to leave USC and their sad schedule behind us as well. And then a couple other exciting games that started between 7:30 Eastern time. So don't go anywhere. Continue to hang out with Dubs, myself, and our special guest coming up at 11:30 Eastern time here on SportsGrid, unpacking the Saturday slate. Stick with us on the other side of this quick break.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. I am ready. I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people.
What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
If you're sliding DiVincenzo to the what? Obviously, Terrence Shannon Jr., that is actually dynamic offensively and defensively. So we'll see how it works. I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. Do both teams win? Yes. I don't think at the end of the day, Minnesota could have afforded to keep Cat, Rudy, and Ant for that amount of money.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I do think they come back, and I think they win this game, but they've got to do it decisively. I think they've got to get that confidence back because they went out there, and like I said earlier, Kentucky almost beat Georgia. Kentucky almost did beat Ole Miss, and I think what you're going to see in this conference, if you don't play well and you're a top 10 team in the SEC, you're going to get knocked out by one of those top 25 teams in the SEC if you're not ready to play.
Powered by SportsGrid.
Back at it with college football today. Kasey Hudson and Dubs Anderson running you through the Saturday slate of an exciting college football day. Now, we're talking about USC and some of their college strength excuses. Not trying to rag on you guys. Sorry, USC. I've got much love for you. But outside of that, we did leave off before the break mentioning that down the road here, they're going to still continue to have a tough competition. Plus, they're going to be going coast to coast, back to back. So that's just going to really amplify their ability to perform and be consistent. But one of the teams on their list coming up here shortly is Notre Dame. Notre Dame with a big win over Stanford, but I don't know if that says much. 49-7 being the beating that it was. But the key thing that I want to zone in on when it comes to talking about the Fighting Irish is going to be Riley Leonard. 229 passing yard performance, 3 touchdowns, and a clean slate when it comes to turnovers and interceptions. Why I'm highlighting this, the dual threat quarterback usually sits around 160 passing yards and then 50 to 100 rushing yards. Today, his rushing yardage only sat at 31, but their ability to kind of readjust their game, commit to that air attack, says a lot about, the versatility that they can have, because their entire running back room didn't really have any sort of breakout performance. Jeremiah Love being the leading guy there, 53 rushing yards on the ground, 1 rushing touchdown. You can always count on a Riley Leonard rushing touchdown. That's usually where I like to put my money, but what did we see out of the Irish today that are going to put them in contention for this college football playoff picture?
They look fantastic, and they go as far as Riley Leonard can carry them with those wheels. Efficient quarterback play. You highlighted there, Kasey. No interceptions with the 3 passing touchdowns. So now we're getting the arm involved in this one. For the smart guys, the Cardinals, Stanford, they showed up. They came ready to play, but then we didn't see them after the first quarter. The opening drive was fantastic, but I guess the highlight for me outside of the fantastic and efficient quarterback play through Riley Leonard was the defense for the Fighting Irish. They absolutely stood up, kept the Cardinals to 7-piece there, and really didn't give them much of a chance to get down the field. There was a lot of pressure going towards their quarterback, Ashton Daniels. He was struggling from the jump. We saw a bit of a mixed bag. They couldn't get their run game going, and playing from behind 22.5. The total was 45 in the hook there. So for Notre Dame to cover that number, this was a very, very impressive victory. And this is one you can take a lot of confidence from. Not giving a team like Stanford much of a chance to get back in this one, who's shown a bit of offensive promise early in the season. So for the Fighting Irish, to say that they picked up a couple of style points, I would say yes, 49-7, emphatic victory out there today.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, and as I've mentioned, just their ability to kind of have this sort of highlight reel performance, even though it's Stanford, it's going to be able to carry some momentum on. Georgia Tech is not a team that you want to ever compete against and underestimate their ability to make it a tight game. Then you've got Navy. I know Navy's usual reputation is their run game. I haven't paid attention to Navy in a few years, but they can be underlying exciting to go against as well. Florida State versus Notre Dame down the stretch, Virginia, Army, and then USC being that closing game on November 30th. So the Fighting Irish have a chance to kind of have a perfect schedule here and continue to prevail and perform offensively and defensively. Hopefully that can continue to be sound for them. As for another game, taking it back to some California conversation, California versus Pittsburgh. This was a bit of a sleeper, but maybe that just speaks to the competition between these two teams. California Golden Bears tried so hard to rally in the fourth quarter there, but a little too late. Falls short to Pittsburgh, 17-15. Pittsburgh really the more controlled team, especially with a big second quarter there. But what are some takeaways from this matchup?
Low scorer, bit of a dogfight, bit of an arm wrestle, if you will. But for the Panthers, came into this one, ranked, moving in the right direction. They probably would have liked to have seen a bit more out of the offense there in the second half. For the Golden Bears, they absolutely gave them a scare in that fourth quarter. So to prevail by 2 points, they may even slip outside the top 25 or hover right around that position there. But hey, still remain undefeated, 2-0 in conference play. If you look at the numbers and the outlook for the schedule going through the next 2-3 weeks, it's Syracuse, SMU, Virginia, and then they'll face off against Clemson. So in terms of the powerhouses coming out of the ACC, Pittsburgh Panthers continue to build momentum. And I tell you what, given the current landscape of college football, where the big teams are looking vulnerable, we've got a couple of outliers who can certainly take down the best of them on any given Saturday. The Panthers, stay in your lane, keep winning games, and they will be right in the thick of it once it's all said and done.
I love how you painted that picture, and I always want to root for an underdog or, at best, an outlier. So much to get into. It's crazy that the football season is almost a wrap, but we are halfway through this post-game show. Most importantly, that guest we've been hinting at, we've got Rich Sermonella joining us on the other side of this break, so don't go anywhere. Stick with us here in College Football Today, the post-game show on SportsGrid TV. And as I remind you guys all the time, chat with us over on social media, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at SportsGrid is the best place to keep in touch with all of your favorite hosts and content. Stick with us, quick break, and our guest joining us on the other side.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. Brady, I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all season long, people.
What in the world is going on in Miami, guys?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
I do sliding DiVincenzo to the what? Obviously, Terrence Channing Jr., that is actually dynamic offensively and defensively. So we'll see how it works. I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. Do both teams win? Yes. I don't think at the end of the day, Minnesota could have afforded to keep Cat, Rudy, and Ant with that amount of money.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I do think they come back, and I think they win this game, but they've got to do it decisively. I think they've got to get that confidence back because they went out there, and like I said earlier, Kentucky almost beat Georgia. Kentucky almost did beat Ole Miss, and I think what you're going to see in this conference, if you don't play well and you're a top 10 team in the SEC, you're going to get knocked out by one of those top 25 teams in the SEC if you're not ready to play.
Powered by SportsGrid.
Welcome back into College Football Today. It's the post-game show running through the Saturday slate. And as I have teased and mentioned, it is not just myself, Kasey Hudson, and nor is it just Kasey and Dubs. We have Rich Sermonella joining us to give us his input on this wild Saturday. I talked about it at the touch of the segment where we had upsets, we had overtimes, we had close calls, we had underdogs pounding their chests, we had Heisman contestants showing why they're in the conversation, but we've got to get the opinion of an expert. So I simply have to start, Rich, by asking, what was the most exciting game for you today? Because Alabama almost lost it to South Carolina, which I was rooting against them, I'm not going to lie. Then you've got Texas versus Oklahoma. Ewers not looking like himself in the first half of that game, but starting to get into a rhythm there. And then Ohio State closes out, falling short to Oregon. And, of course, you know that Gabriel Dillon is one of the talks of the town. So what stood out to you the most on this Saturday slate?
We even had Purdue, Illinois going to overtime, 50-49. Illinois remaining ranked over Purdue, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. For me, Kasey, this was really about Penn State. I know Oregon and Ohio State, that took center stage tonight. That was a heavyweight title fight. Both of those teams look like strong playoff contenders, maybe even national championship contenders. But Penn State rallying from 2 touchdowns down. It was talked about all week. If you followed some of the betting trends, 1-8 teams outright when they traveled more than 2 time zones. So if you go east to west, west to east, those teams lost 8 of 9 games. Looked like a really difficult spot for Penn State, leaving Happy Valley, going out to the Coliseum. 20-6 early, but they regroup at halftime. They rally. They win that game 33-30. I thought Drew Aller was fantastic in the second half. Tyler Warren ties an FBS record for tight ends, 17 receptions, Most receiving yards ever by a Penn State tight end, 224 yards. So great win for James Franklin. I've been tough on him in the past that he struggles in big games, beating the Michigans and Ohio State. Now they go out to the Coliseum. I thought that was a gut check win and potentially a turning point for Penn State moving into the second half of the season.
Absolutely.
Rich, Kasey and myself.
Yeah, go ahead, Dubs. I was just going to say we were talking about that.
Good cop, bad cop here on a Saturday night. What about the USC Trojans, Rich? What about Lincoln Riley, the 30-minute football team? How do they let another one slip like this? And what's the outlook for them moving through the rest of the season?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dubs. I'm a big fan of Lincoln Riley. Obviously very familiar with his history, with quarterbacks, with Heisman winning quarterbacks. His offenses are as dynamic as any in the country, going back to the Oklahoma days. Now with USC, Caleb Williams over the last 2 seasons, now Miller Moss. But I think this is going to get very difficult for Lincoln Riley because what we've seen so far in the first half of the season is an inability to finish games. We saw that against Michigan. We saw that against Minnesota, saw it again today against Penn State. And while other teams are adapting to play in new conferences, that has not been the case for USC. Now, defensive improvement this year, that's a good sign with the new coordinator, D'Anton Lynn. But to me, when you can't close games, when you can't finish, that falls on the coaching staff. And, Lincoln Riley has to be more than a one-half coach. He's got to be more than just a one side of the ball coach. That's now 3 losses for USC. Forget about any kind of a playoff chase down the stretch. I think this could be a difficult second half of the season. A lot of these kids are NFL bound. A lot of these kids have 1 foot on Sundays, 1 foot on Saturdays. And what is the motivation for USC moving forward? So again, big fan of Lincoln Riley, but man, he's got a lot to prove if he wants to show that he's a legit national championship contending coach.
Yeah, that was something that Dubs and I were trying to figure out as well. And Dubs mentioned brilliantly that they kind of realized that their strength of schedule may be harder than others, but I feel like they had the pieces to rise to the occasion. It's just kind of falling short, and that tends to fall on the shoulders of the coaches. Kind of speaking of some coaches when it comes to the college conversation and some brilliant plays there, I thought Texas kind of got off to a slower start versus Oklahoma today, but I feel like that's kind of been their rhythm, feeling out their opponent in the first quarter and then really packing a punch as they get into the second and third quarter. I talked about yours maybe having a slower start there, but what did you see out of the Heisman candidate in this Texas team? Most importantly, their defense, holding Oklahoma to just 3.
Yeah, I think you're right, Kasey. I think there was some rust. Sometimes you have to be able to figure out, is it rest or rust? For Quinn Ewers, it was almost a month of inaction. Obviously, Arch Manning took over while he was out with that oblique injury, and he was a little slow out of the gate, but he's a big-time quarterback. He's a next-level quarterback. And for me, this was all about getting the W, getting revenge from last year against your rival, Oklahoma. To your point, defense was fantastic. Oklahoma overmatched in this one, starting a true freshman quarterback in Michael Hawkins. Sooners, top 5 wide receivers on the shelf for this week. So very difficult spot for Oklahoma. This was really about preparing for next weekend against Georgia. Georgia heads to Austin. That's going to be the game of week 8. Massive for Texas, but huge for Georgia as well, because Dubs and I, we talked about it last weekend. Something is missing with Georgia, and we saw it a little bit today against Mississippi State, giving up 31 points. This is not the Georgia team that can just shut down opponents. This is not the Georgia team that could just name its number week in and week out. And so Georgia now going to Austin, if they lose that game next weekend, they could be on playoff life support with more than 2 months left in the season.
Georgia with that big win, 41-31. And Rich, it really feels like there's a lot of parity in college football right now. The Crimson Tide survive a thriller, 27-25. Not so much about the Gamecocks being fantastic to push them all the way with a real good chance of sending it to OT. But what's the missing spark here for Alabama? Is it just a bit of a hangover from what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and can they turn it around?
Well, Bama's a head scratcher for me, because what I expected this weekend would be a big answer off of the Vanderbilt loss. Now, we know that Alabama's defense is not as stout as it was in the Nick Saban days. And that's something that you would expect with Kalen DeBoer now as the head coach. But I expected to see a bigger output from the offense today. Jalen Milroe, a couple of picks, inconsistent, allowed South Carolina to get back in that game. That's a home game in Tuscaloosa. So right now I'm beginning to wonder, is this a playoff team? And if they are, I'd like to get your guys' take. I don't know if they're built for the playoffs right now because defensively, this is not a championship caliber team, and offensively, just inconsistent. So I'm not sure what to expect from Alabama at this point. And I think it's a big concern in Tuscaloosa in year one for Kalen DeBoer.
Yeah, that is the big concern because what I acknowledged, or at least what I thought I saw the Gamecocks doing very well game plan-wise, was they were able to force Milroe out to the perimeter a lot. They took away his chunk play opportunities. They took away his ability to use his legs a number of times. So while he still had those opportunities, he seemed slightly solvable, and we're talking about a South Carolina defense. So competition's just going to get heavier. But kind of speaking of some of these top teams that are going to have to figure out how they're going to fit into the playoff picture, what are maybe your underdogs to sneak into the playoff picture, or what top team do you think is at least playing and performing to their top 5 status?
It's been my favorite conference since it realigned, Kasey, which is the Big 12. Big 12 just fascinates me. I've been saying for close to a year that from a geographic standpoint, from a parity perspective, someone's going to come out of that conference that no one expects. Utah looked like a heavy favorite. They suffered their second loss of the season, second Big 12 loss as well, Friday night against Arizona State. In Casey, you have teams like ASU. Kenny Dillingham has the Sun Devils at 5-1. You have Colorado and K-State playing right now, both contenders in the Big 12. And oh, by the way, BYU, which had long odds for the Big 12 heading into the season, 6-0 at this point. Nobody saw that coming. Iowa State creeping into the top 10. So for me, if you want excitement and conference excitement, it's all about the Big 12 down the stretch.
They have produced some of the most exciting football games this collegiate season. I have to agree with that. And it's pretty wild to see the Sun Devils in the conversation. I know a few alumni there that are just going wild over their performance as of late. But so much more college football to get into here on SportsGrid TV. Don't go anywhere. We've got more to unpack college football today. It's the post-game show with Kasey, Rich, and Dubs. I'll see you on the other side of this break.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in this set than I do for this year. Brady, I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people.
What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
I do a sliding DiVincenzo to the one. Obviously, Terrence Jennings Jr., that is actually dynamic offensively and defensively. So we'll see how it works. I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. Do both teams win? Yes. I don't think at the end of the day, Minnesota could have afforded to keep Cat, Rudy, and Ant with that amount of money.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I do think they come back, and I think they win this game, but they've got to do it decisively. I think they've got to get that confidence back because they went out there, and like I said earlier, Kentucky almost beat Georgia. Kentucky almost did beat Ole Miss, and I think what you're going to see in this conference, if you don't play well and you're a top 10 team in the SEC, you're going to get knocked out by one of those top 25 teams in the SEC if you're not ready to play.
Powered by SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football today. It's the post-game show with Kasey, Dubs, and Rich running through the Saturday slate, as you've heard me mention time and time again, but it's been so exciting. And speaking of excitement, we've got a tied game between Ole Miss and LSU. This first quarter, I really did not know where to expect this game to go. I know that there's been a large conversation around Ole Miss and their strength of schedule and where the tests are truly going to lie. I've been a big fan of watching Jackson Dart, another dual-threat quarterback in the quarterback conversation, 284 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception at the moment. And his need for legs today only sits at 33 rushing yards, and that's through 14 carries, which just tells you some of the issues that LSU has presented. But, Rich, I'm going to throw this one to you. You got Dart in the Heisman conversation, but you've got Nussmeier, who's actually kind of showed up and delivered for his team. He's sitting at 312 passing yards, probably somebody who hasn't been as highly talked about in the quarterback conversation. I would more so say after they almost fell short to South Carolina. But what are we missing when it comes to LSU and their deliverables this season?
Yeah, LSU is a bit of a mystery right now. I expected more at this stage of the Brian Kelly era. Longtime Notre Dame coach. I thought it was a good fit for him to go to the SEC, knows how to develop players, knows how to recruit, now has the resources, now has the ability to get more 5-star players, which wasn't always the case with the academic rigors at Notre Dame. But this year, you know, defensively, they're so-so. Harold Perkins, their best defensive player, is out for the season. Big fan of Garrett Nussmeier. I think in terms of players whose draft stock will rise very quickly, assuming he does declare at the end of the season, I think Nussmeier falls into that category. Same with his wide receiver, Kyron Lacey. But 23-23 looks like it's going into overtime. This is a playoff elimination game. In the SEC, if you have 2 losses, at this stage of the season, I think you're done. One big takeaway for me from this game, you know, we think about offense and Jackson Dart, but last couple of weeks, Ole Miss's defense has really come around. If they can combine Dart and Ulysses Bentley and Trey Harris on the outside with an improved defense, get the W in Baton Rouge tonight, which is very difficult to do, as you know, at night in Death Valley, get the win here, and they could have a strong run towards the playoffs in the second half.
Rich, if we think it's hotly contested to be number 1 in the nation, who's going to make it through to the playoffs? Let's stick with the Heisman market, or turn to the Heisman market, I should say. Up there in Eugene, quack, the Ducks get it done 32-31 over Ohio State. Was this the Heisman moment for Dillon Gabriel, passing for 2 touchdowns, putting up monster numbers in the box score, and runs one into the house there as well?
Totally. You know, and I think we talked about it last Saturday night as well. Really, a lot came down to how do you perform in games of this magnitude? Oregon, you guys remember in September, some surprising close calls. Idaho, Boise State, before we really were sure what Boise State was going to be this year. Oregon did not look like a top 5 team, but again, this was a Herculean victory for the Ducks. Ohio State, I believe, is the most talented roster out of any team in the FBS. They spent $20 million in the offseason in NIL money to attract this roster. They get Chip Kelly from formerly Oregon and UCLA and the Philadelphia Eagles to be the offensive coordinator. Even though this game was at Alton, a win of this magnitude is massive for Oregon, massive for Dillon Gabriel. He looked like a veteran. I love the poise in the pocket. I love his accuracy on deep balls to Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson. I thought he was terrific. Listen, I thought Will Howard played really well also. I know at the end of the game he lost track of time management. He slid when the clock was running out, when maybe there would have been a shot for a long field goal. I thought both of these quarterbacks played well, but right now it's got to be Dillon Gabriel. And Ashton Jeanty has been an absolute locomotive. He's going to go over 2,000 yards this year, but I'm just not sure if Heisman voters are going to champion a kid who plays week in and week out against Mountain West competition.
Yeah, that is a good point. And maybe sticking with the Heisman conversation, but pivoting to another key quarterback. We talked about Oregon kind of having some shaky starts there and compete, but we're talking about a Georgia team that came out highly ranked, highly anticipated to have this big season. They probably haven't had the most exciting football in terms of what the expectation was to what they've delivered over the past 2 weeks. But you got Carson Beck that still finds a way to put up the numbers. I mean, even though they allowed Mississippi State to put up 31 points today, Beck's got 459 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. But of course, the turnovers have been a bit costly and a bit out of characteristic for him. So what can we expect in terms of his, Heisman stock and the way that it might be drafting or dropping down if Georgia can't pull off that seamless performance that we're all looking for.
If you're interested in Carson Beck in terms of the futures market and the Heisman, do it now, because really not many people are talking about Carson Beck and the Heisman. I mentioned that next weekend, Georgia goes to Austin to play Texas, top-ranked Texas, by the way. If Carson Beck engineers an upset of the Longhorns, those odds are going to get a lot shorter. So if you're interested in Carson Beck, do it now. Do it this week. But I'm not one of those people. He's looked like a different quarterback this year. Kasey, you mentioned the turnovers. That has been a trend throughout the season. That was not the case last year. Still very talented. Not the targets he had a year ago. No Brock Bowers at tight end. He's now in Vegas. And Carson Beck has suffered accordingly. So Georgia's got to turn it up soon. 31 points allowed to Mississippi State, worst team in the SEC. A moment, you guys probably caught it, where Kirby Smart lost his cool and actually shoved Bulldogs quarterback, the other Bulldogs quarterback, by the way, not his own, but Michael Van Buren Jr. From Mississippi State. So Georgia just seems like they're a little bit off kilter going back to that first half against Alabama, the close call with Kentucky. I don't see Georgia beating Texas. I'm going to go with the McConaughey's next weekend, which would be a great game.
Absolutely. And I like that you painted the picture of how that game tended to unravel, because what's tough when you have a talented roster and you've got all the potential is they're kind of lacking in that mental game. They seem to kind of tap out during the games. They seem to kind of bit against one another mentally. They're just not as sharp as they were last season, and that could play against them with the tough competition that is this college football season. Coming down the slate here, you mentioned Texas. They also have Florida that pulled off a close game versus Tennessee. After that, Ole Miss, who's putting up a big fight versus LSU, and then Tennessee, UMass, and then Georgia Tech. So not the easiest schedule if you're not mentally prepared, but also able to put all the pieces together. So we'll see what to expect out of a dominant Georgia team that's just kind of falling short to the standard. We got another segment to rally here at College Football Today. It's the post-game show with Kasey, Rich, and Dub. So don't go anywhere. Another quick break here on SportsGrid TV.
Right here with you on Pro Football Today on SportsGrid. Odds in motion, trying to see what lines have moved throughout the week.
Never felt more comfortable in the set than I do for this year. Brady, I'm just getting angry. The hot takes are going to be here all long, people.
What in the world is going on in Miami, Dom?
It's not particularly anything to shy away from just because many people are on top of it.
Hot take, hot take.
I think this line is asking you once again to take New Orleans.
Pro Football Today, only on SportsGrid.
If you're sliding DiVincenzo to the one, obviously Terrence Shannon Jr., that is actually dynamic offensively and defensively. So we'll see how it works. I think it's a little bit of a work in progress. Do both teams win? Yes. I don't think at the end of the day Minnesota could have afforded to keep Cat, Rudy, and Ant with that amount of money.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
I do think they come back, and I think they win this game, but they've got to do it decisively. I think they've got to get that confidence back because they went out there, and like I said earlier, Kentucky almost beat Georgia. Kentucky almost did beat Ole Miss, and I think what you're going to see in this conference, if you don't play well and you're a top 10 team in the SEC, you're going to get knocked out by one of those top 25 teams in the SEC if you're not ready to play.
Powered by SportsGrid.
One more rally here at college football today. It's the post-game show with Kasey, Rich, and Dubs, and we've been breaking down all of the exciting football on this Saturday slate. But most importantly, before we wrap, we're going to talk about some of the scores. We're going to talk about what's going on at this hour, and then Dubs and I get to our betting cards, and Rich is going to let us know his 3 top takeaways either from today's wild games or probably the playoff picture as a whole as things start to get molded before they get concrete. Now, Ole Miss and LSU 23-23 is what I'm still seeing on my end. When it comes to Kansas State at halftime, they're up on Colorado 14-7. Travis Hunter with an injury to the shoulder, I believe my producer mentioned moments ago. You got Sanders with 152 passing yards, 1 touchdown, not much of a ground game coming out of Colorado. And then in the air, it's Miller leading the wide receiving room with 42 receiving yards. As for Avery Johnson, I always refer to him as Mr. Gatorade. It's probably getting old by now, but 53 passing yards for Mr. Gatorade and a negative minus 18 on the ground through 5 carries. So interesting to see these numbers for Kansas State versus Colorado. We know Colorado can put up a big fight there, but I think Kansas State can readjust and get more consistent in their ground game and see what we see out of Mr. Gatorade. Boise State on top 10-0 over Hawaii. I wanted to go there just to cheer and throw up the signs. And then you've got Iowa State 28-16 versus West Virginia, but I think that was earlier today. So most importantly, gentlemen, before we get into our betting cards, I'm going to start with Rich. I'm going to ask about your 3 top takeaways from today's football slate.
Yeah, I'll go quickly, guys. Ohio State, Oregon, we had to have a loser in that one, but in terms of college football playoff chases, no losers in that one. I know you got the L for Ohio State by a point, but both of those teams firmly in the playoff picture. Both were impressive. They played 10 times. I think you'd have 5-5 in that one. Tennessee, I'm confused about Tennessee at this point. I'm confused about Alabama. I'm confused about a lot of teams in the SEC, but Tennessee in particular, what has happened to that offense? I mean, they barely scored against Florida. Florida had a golden opportunity to get a big win for Billy Napier, couldn't close the deal. Tennessee and Alabama, 2 of the mysteries in the SEC, play next weekend. That's going to be fascinating to see who comes out of that matchup. And my final one from today would be Penn State. I mean, that is a massive victory for the Nittany Lions to go out to the Coliseum, come back from 2 touchdowns down. Huge for Penn State, huge for James Franklin. He gets a big boulder off of his back. It's a big signature win. So Penn State, number 4, could maybe rise a little bit higher heading into this week's polls.
Yeah, good point. The only way I can root for Penn State is because they gave the Tampa Bay Bucks Chris Godwin. Other than that, Dave Sherapan, I'm rooting against you. Dubs, let's get into your betting card of the day. How did you do? Because, well, if we close out this show and I never mention any of my bets of the day, I'll be just fine and sleep well and tight. So tell me about your best bets for the day.
Yeah, we'll go through top 5 best bets of the day. It started with a tough beat. San Diego State against Wyoming, and Wyoming there on the money line. They drop it late 27-24, so we lose that one. But then we had the Longhorns, team total over 33.5. They put up 34, so we cashed. Ole Miss, LSU, game total under 63.5. They're in OT, 46 combined, so we're going to get that one home. Ohio State taking on Oregon. The Ducks quack on the money line, plus 128, 32-31 in a close one, so we'll cash that. And then Vandy taking on Kentucky. Took Vandy grabbing 12.5, fresh off that big performance last week. They got the job done 20-13 outright. So we go 4-5 off that bad beat to start the Saturday. So not a bad afternoon.
Ouch, I should have gone first. That's all I heard when you read through your card. But great grab there for Oregon. I mean, especially at plus money. I'll make this quick. Okay, a lot of hope in Quinn Ewers, and I had him for 250-plus passing yards. Didn't even break 200. But again, that shaky start worked against both of us, and I expected more out of Quinn, but I'm not going to hold it against him. He's still Heisman in my category. Now, true freshman, Michael Hawkins, obviously being the rhythm and the cadence of that Oklahoma Sooners team after they switched from Jackson Arnold. I already had him in for under 165 passing yards. That actually hit. He only came up with, I want to say, 140 or 142. The pass attack is not his game. They brought him in to be able to orchestrate his legs to get some momentum on their offense. But that leads me to the third bet that I had that did not hit. I was only asking for over 33 rushing yards. Over 33 rushing yards for a guy who has made this look so simple. Blew my mind, but that didn't pan out. I had Isaiah Bond over 4.5 receptions and a Bond touchdown to secure a W for this team. You see Bond, well, 5 receiving yards. I'm going to leave it at that. That's a wrap on the night for myself, Kasey Hudson, Rich Simonello, and Dubs Anderson. Once again, make sure you're following SportsGrid over on X, Twitter, and all the social media platforms to continue with the content. As for tonight, I hope everybody has a safe Saturday night, and we'll catch you guys next time.